Warm ground. A joyful man ran into the house and headed towards his wife. "I did it, honey," he said, and whirled the woman into a waltz. "What? What did you do?" she asked joyfully, happily twirling in the dance. "I bought us a house," the man replied enthusiastically. "I bought us a house." "What?" the wife replied, uncomprehendingly. "What house? What are you talking about?" "Remember Zhenya from the government procurement department?" The woman nodded. "He also deals with bank real estate auctions." The wife still looked at her husband with incomprehension and distrust. "We had drinks together once in a group, and we kind of became friends. He promised to help me with housing, and he kept his word." "Is that the one you disappear with to the sauna on weekends?" the wife asked pointedly, sternly. "Can he be trusted?" "Yes, I have the documents for the house." He raised his hand with the folder of papers and handed them to his wife. She quickly glanced over the papers and asked in surprise, "But this is one of the best neighborhoods in Ransk. How did you manage this?" "Just lucky." The man looked at his beloved with a warm gaze. "The previous owners of the house stopped paying the mortgage on it apparently. They left the city without saying a word to anyone." "Where did you get that kind of money? Can we even afford this?" "Yes, I used all our savings and also took out a loan, but there won't be any problems. With my job, I can easily handle the monthly payment." Having fully realized everything, the girl squealed and threw herself on her husband's neck. "That's it, Nastya. Enough of us running back and forth between rented apartments. It's time to build our nest and have children." "Yes, honey, it's high time." The young family spent the next week in pleasant chores, packing their belongings and preparing for the move. A bank employee, a neat-looking young man, met them at the doorstep of what was now their house. Vanya and Nastya stood a little further away to get a better look at their family nest. The employee introduced himself as Andrey and offered to show them the house and sign all the necessary documents. According to Andrey, this house was one of the first built in the area, and the others simply grew around it in some natural way. Therefore, they would be living practically in the very center of their small cottage settlement. Andrey also apologized for the somewhat neglected state of the house. For some reason, this wonderful place can't seem to find permanent owners, and it seems like this house has its own character, Andrey joked mysteriously. "But I'm sure that 2 pairs of loving hands will make this house a paradise. I just happen to know 2 such pairs." Nastya laughed, and Ivan supported her. "I guarantee you, Andrey, that I will soon turn this place into the best house in the neighborhood." "I'm sure it will be." Andrey smiled and added, "If you change your mind and decide to leave this place after all, our bank will gladly buy the house back, but then you will most likely lose a lot of money." "What's over there?" Ivan pointed towards the basement door, trying to change the subject from the unpleasant topic. "Oh, you mean the basement door?" the employee began awkwardly. "It's mostly old things left over from the previous owners." "Why is it locked?" Nastya wondered. "It's for safety reasons," Andrey drawled. "People could get hurt on old things and get sick, so we decided to just lock this door. I think it's better to leave it that way. Who knows what might happen?" An awkward silence hung in the air, which seemed to have arisen out of nowhere. The bank employee broke the silence. Saying goodbye, he took the signed papers with him and left the house, leaving the happy new residents alone. In the evening, neighbors knocked on the door. A lovely elderly couple, of that European type, when people, as they say, age beautifully and stately. It seemed that at any moment they could be captured in a photo and immediately sent to the cover of a fashion magazine without even retouching. Their movements were smooth, unhurried, and measured. The newlyweds were pleasantly surprised by the visit and invited the neighbors into the house. Nastya prepared some simple snacks, and the men talked about renovations and the history of their neighborhood. The stately neighbors told them about the friendly community in their cottage village, and how they, together with the first residents, chose the name Warm Ground. When the newlyweds asked who built this house and where they are now, the neighbors replied that they no longer remember who lived here first. When they arrived here, the house was already standing, and they just started building around it, and the houses spread like the branches of a strong oak. Although there is a legend that this house was built on the site of an old tree that has been preserved here since the time when people did not yet walk the earth, and the trees were very young and bizarre, and they had to compete with carnivorous creatures. It seemed that we simply felt the call of the earth, and it was our best decision, because the years spent here together were the most wonderful. Ivan and Nastya looked admiringly at their neighbors, and each of them involuntarily imagined how they would also spend their whole lives together and grow old together. While they were all talking, Nastya tried to find at least some flaw in her neighbors. She couldn't believe that people could be so perfect, but the only thing that came to her mind was that they had too many plant allegories in their speech. Although people of their generation adore Dutchess vegetable gardens and constantly talk about their seedlings. And our neighbors can be forgiven for that, she thought. Leaving and saying goodbye warmly, the neighbors told them how happy they were that fresh blood would finally flow into their village. How happy all the residents would be, because their average age was already closer to elderly, and with a young family, the village would blossom. At night, Nastya woke up to a scratching sound in the walls or floor. She thought it was mice, and it frightened her greatly. They had terrified her since childhood, but she also loved her husband and didn't want to wake or disturb him because he needed a good sleep to pay for their shared nest. Nastya quietly got out of bed and decided to trace the source and direction of the sounds to exterminate the pests before they completely gnawed through her wonderful house. The sounds indeed weren't stationary and gradually moved deeper into the house, drawing Anastasia along. Lighting her way with her phone's flashlight, she carefully followed the rustling and scratching sound in the walls down to the first floor. It was strange, but the sound wasn't like the patter of many small, disgusting feet. It seemed more like something was crawling, or rather dragging itself in the walls, transitioning to the floor and leading her to the ground floor. Nastya bravely followed the sound, intending to expose the nocturnal pests until she came up against the closed basement door. After checking the lock with her hands and making sure it was secure, she returned to sleep, firmly resolved to deal with this as soon as possible. In the morning, as Ivan was getting ready for work and walking to his car, a vagrant tagged along behind him. He looked somehow out of place against the backdrop of the perfect gated community with its neat houses, evenly trimmed lawns, and toy-like fences. It's like a dream come true, Ivan thought, anticipating a glorious day, and took a deep breath. The vagrant suddenly appeared in front of him, making him jump in surprise. "What do you want?" Ivan asked, surprised. "You shouldn't have bought this house," the vagrant rasped, looking angrily into the frightened man's eyes. "You need to leave immediately." "Excuse me?" Ivan replied, still recovering from the fright. Anastasia came out onto the porch and asked her husband if everything was all right. Ivan nervously nodded in response. "What are you talking about? No need to apologize. Go away. Get out of here." The vagrant wanted to touch him, but Ivan pushed him away, and he, losing his balance, fell onto the paved driveway. Neighboring doors began to open, and residents started to come out. Rosa, the neighbor who had come yesterday, also came out. Fedya, Don't scare our new neighbors." She walked quickly and confidently towards the fallen vagrant. The fallen man slowly and clumsily got up and said barely audibly, "Don't go into the basement, don't go into the basement, do you hear me?" Having said this, and making sure that the man understood his words, the vagrant slowly walked away, groaning along the way, and Rosa waved after him as if she were chasing away a fly. "What was that?" Ivan asked, bewildered. "Oh," Rosa drawled. "That's our local fool Fedya. He also built this settlement with us once, but gradually lost his mind." "And why did that happen?" Ivan asked, still recovering. "My dear, even in the best flower bed, weeds sometimes appear. People usually get rid of them, but in our settlement we believe in natural balance, and weeds are also an important part of our world. And getting rid of a person wouldn't be so easy, right?" Ivan chuckled, having recovered. "That's true," Rosa laughed in response. "People are so fragile, but it's so hard to get rid of them," Rosa muttered thoughtfully. "Excuse me?" "Oh, I'm saying that now we support Fedya as much as we can. We feel sorry for him. No one takes care of him. How much longer does he have left?" the neighbor said, and seemed to be thinking about something distant. "Although sometimes it seems to me that he will outlive us all." "God, I'm late," Ivan interrupted the silence, looking at his watch, and set off on his way. That night Nastya slept poorly again and woke up hearing a scratching at the bedroom door. During the day she couldn't open the basement door and simply scattered poison under the crack of the door. This time she decided to wake her husband. Nastya knew that Vanya wouldn't take action until he saw or heard the problem himself. The sleepy man didn't resist and went with his wife. Reaching the basement door, they saw that the lock was missing and someone was scratching from the other side. "Nastya, did you take the lock off?" Ivan asked, still sleepy. "No," Nastya drawled out, frightened. "I was cleaning and choosing curtains all day." The man immediately became serious. The sleepiness that had overcome him a moment ago vanished instantly. Taking the hammer lying by the door, he returned and slowly opened it. For some reason at that moment he remembered the local vagrant. When Vanya returned from work, he met him again. The vagrant looked sternly at him and shook his head disapprovingly. The door was all scratched on the other side. A staircase led down into the darkness, and there were marks on it, as if something heavy had been dragged along it. The husband wanted to turn around, close the door, and hang the lock again, but Nastya was already holding a flashlight ready. She resolutely handed it to her hero. Ivan realized that he couldn't get out of it, and trying to maintain an outwardly calm appearance, began to slowly descend the stairs. Gradually overcoming all the steps, to their surprise the couple discovered, or rather didn't discover, any belongings of the previous owners. Why did this Andrey deceive us? Ivan thought. And he remembered that creepy vagrant again. He wanted to run away and come back during the day, but he couldn't lose face in front of his wife, and he went on. Suddenly, he felt someone's hand on his shoulder, and he jumped up, turned around in panic, and shone the light in front of him. It turned out to be his wife, Nastya, who was looking at him with the same frightened eyes, biting her lip to keep from screaming. Exhaling with relief, he turned around again and heard scratching and some strange whispers. He couldn't make out a word, and turning to his wife asked, "Do you hear that?" Nastya quickly nodded her head affirmatively. "What's there?" his wife asked, looking ahead. "Where?" her husband replied reluctantly and pointed the flashlight in the direction Nastya was looking. "Yes, right there," his wife answered in an insistent loud whisper. "On the wall, something dark. Go and look." Ivan was terribly scared and cursed himself for this weakness, but he went forward, overcoming the tension in his muscles. There really was something dark on the wall, something that absorbed the beam of light. Reaching the spot, the couple discovered a kind of crack that ran vertically along the entire wall, from the ceiling to the floor. Not too wide, but wide enough for some animal or a medium-sized person to crawl through. A musty smell emanated from it, but there was no draft. Ivan exhaled. "It's all clear," he said in his normal voice, no longer afraid of being overheard. "What's clear to you?" his wife replied. "The house is old apparently, the foundation has cracked, and stray animals from all around are getting in here and scratching at the door. It's a good thing the ceiling hasn't collapsed." "Then why did the bank lock the door?" "Because they didn't want to spend money on repairs. They want to save every penny, greedy as badgers." Nastya thoughtfully shook her head, and Ivan added, "It's not even clear what lives in the walls." At that moment, Nastya flinched in fright, but Ivan held her close and she felt better. "I'll look for some service tomorrow to quickly seal this hole, and now let's go to sleep." The rest of the night was difficult for Nastya. She dreamed that she was surrounded by some insects, hordes of rats, mice, and even some snakes. She tried to escape from them, to push them away, but she got stuck in the ground, in some grass and roots. All this was just everywhere around her, and then the alarm clock rang. Nastya didn't like early mornings and alarm clocks, but this time she was sincerely glad to hear that annoying sound. Besides, she considered it her sacred duty to feed her husband a substantial breakfast and help him get ready, especially after she woke him up in the middle of the night and he bravely went to deal with the danger. Ivan quickly got ready for work and, kissing his wife, walked towards the car. His wife saw him off, watching him from the window until he got into the car. That local crazy man approached him again and tried to say something to him. The neighbors started coming out of their houses again, but Ivan just waved him off and drove away. "It's good that this fool is harmless," thought Nastya. "Or is he? I don't know anything about him." She found it a little strange that even though her husband had left and the vagrant had gone away, the neighbors remained on their porches and, facing the sky, enjoyed the morning sun. She even had the urge to do the same, but then she changed her mind. The young woman quickly banished the unnecessary thoughts from her head and returned to tidying up and creating comfort in her family nest. How hard they had worked, so persistently, to have their own house, and now they have it. A new stage of their life is beginning, and only happiness awaits her family in the future. Her heart was filled with joy. While she was fantasizing about the future and busy with the house, her attention was caught by some noise. She didn't even immediately understand what it was, but the familiar sound of scratching quickly surfaced in her mind. Exhaling angrily, Nastya grabbed a broom and moved towards the basement, ready to show the uninvited guest all her righteous anger. She quickly ran down the stairs and moved towards the crack in the wall. It seemed to her that something was pulled into it, and she even stopped for a second. Approaching the crack, she began to examine it more closely. It didn't look like an ordinary crack. At least it seemed so to her. Yes, the concrete foundation of the house had split like a crack, but the edges of the hole were soft, elastic, like some kind of wound or maybe rubber. Perhaps someone before them had tried to use some newfangled sealant that she simply didn't know about. And now she sees the consequences of someone unsuccessfully trying to pull the edges of the crack together. They formed something like a sideways mouth. The hole clearly led somewhere, it wasn't blind. Maybe the crack leads to the sewer, thought Nastya. While she was examining the crack in the wall, pleased with herself for having chased away the intruder, she began to hear a kind of whisper, or chirping, or vibration. It sounded human, yes, but somehow distant. "Is anyone there?" she asked, expecting to hear silence in response. But someone quietly answered her. Nastya didn't make out what was said to her, and listening again asked, "Is anyone there?" "Help me." A quiet child's moan came from the crack. "Help me," Nastya heard again, and distinguished a little girl's voice. "Little girl, are you there?" Nastya cried anxiously into the crack. "How did you get in there?" "Help me. I can't stand this anymore. Help me." Nastya carefully crawled into the open hole, obeying a sudden instinct. She turned on the flashlight on her phone and soon found herself in a long tunnel, stretching far into the darkness. After examining the tunnel, she hesitated for a second, wanting to call someone for help. But the child's pleas for rescue did their job. Lighting her way, Nastya breathed heavily. The air was warm and stale. The walls were formed by bizarrely arranged roots, which formed a kind of pipe. The deeper the girl crawled inside, the harder it was for her to think. Her head began to spin, and the roots began to pulsate, pushing the girl inward. The girl inside began to cry desperately and ask for help, but this cry became somehow distant, strange, otherworldly. Nastya could no longer crawl further and wanted to turn around, but the pulsating movements of the tunnel pushed her forward into the darkness. Ivan returned home in the evening. The sun was already setting. Nastya didn't meet him, and this was strange because she always waited for him with hugs. These hugs from his wife were the greatest comfort and rest after a long working day. Ivan called out to Nastya but heard no answer. He frowned and went to look for his wife around the house. She wasn't in the bedroom, nor in the kitchen, nor in the living room, or anywhere else on the ground or first floor. Frightened for the fate of his beloved, Ivan began to call his wife's name loudly. When he finally decided to call the police, he heard Nastya's voice. She was calling him. He didn't immediately understand where the voice was coming from, and again called out to her loudly. Moving in the direction of the sound, he stopped at the basement door. His beloved was calling from the gloom, not just from the basement floor, but from the complete blackness of the crack. Ivan slowly descended the stairs and walked towards the voice. Approaching the opening in the wall, he called out to his wife. She answered softly, wearily. Her voice sounded pained and somehow hopeless. Nastya was calling him, saying she needed help, that there was almost no time left. She begged him to free her. Ivan again sensed a musty smell, but it was unlike anything he had smelled before. Stale, with a mixture of something sweet, like peat or humus. The smell made him dizzy, and it was difficult to think. He was lost for a second, as if stunned. Another cry for help brought him back to his senses. His beloved was looking for him, and Ivan bravely climbed into the crack and crawled along the long, narrow tunnel dug in the earth. He lit his way with the flashlight on his phone. The walls of the tunnel were made of tightly interwoven roots that covered everything around and disappeared somewhere far ahead. As Ivan crawled and struggled with the fear of the confined space, he periodically bumped into strange flowers that stuck out from the root walls, with a bright red berry-like fruit that reflected the light of the flashlight. The flower turned towards the crawling Ivan and followed his movement. The man was almost happy that the disgusting smell clouded his mind and prevented him from completely succumbing to panic. The tunnel began to contract and expand, pulsate. Ivan even thought at first that it was just his imagination, that he had inhaled so much of this foul smell that his consciousness had finally become inflamed and begun to distort his perception of reality. Finally, the man realized that the tunnel was sucking him in, or rather pushing him inward like a huge intestine, an intestine he had crawled into of his own free will. and despite the fact that he himself made no movements, he was slowly but surely moving forward and could no longer stop. His breathing quickened, panic seized him more and more, and the tunnel began to narrow. Ivan reached the point where fear took complete control over him. He began to scream, scratch at the roots, try to wriggle out, and Nastya's voice called to him without stopping. Then the tunnel pushed him out, and he fell onto something soft. Dropping his phone, Ivan waved his arms and tried to get up, and because of the unreliable ground, which was covered with something, it took him some time. He found his flashlight and decided to look around. Shining the light around, he realized that he was in some kind of large cave that had formed around a huge twisted trunk of roots, looking very ancient. Everything around was covered with branches that reached the very ceiling of the cave. Twisted root trunks pierced the ground and diverged in different directions. These roots pulsated, and the stem lianas seemed to be constantly moving and crawling somewhere. At the very base of the ancient root system, purple shoots grew, releasing into the surrounding space a fog with the same disgusting smell that was driving the man mad. All this was accompanied by the sickening sound of unnatural rustling, shuffling, and wooden creaking. The lianas crawled towards Ivan, wrapped around his legs, and tried to crawl up him. He called out to Nastya, and roughly tearing off the stems, began to move so that it would be harder to catch him. Every second of stopping led to the plants seizing his legs. Nastya's voice could no longer be heard, and the man simply rushed around the cave, trying to find his beloved. The lianas wrapped around his legs more and more tightly and roughly. It became increasingly difficult to break free from them. A small sharp pain shot through his leg. Ivan howled sharply and loudly and directed the light at the source of the pain. What he saw made him scream in horror. These damned plants, these vile lianas, were piercing his skin and growing right into his leg. With a wild cry, he tore the cursed plants from his legs, but some of them still remained in him, and the man saw them spreading under his skin in the light of the flashlight. Apparently, in response to his cries of horror, Ivan heard a moan and a groan. Instinctively, panicked, he rushed towards the sound. Before Ivan appeared a picture that made him scream again with all his might, but the plants completely absorbed the sound. Nastya was woven into the wall of plants, and they were crawling over her. The lianas were woven into her body, and in places they entered and exited it. She could not scream, as her mouth was filled with roots that slowly, with pulsating movements, crawled into her. Her arms and legs were completely absorbed by roots, lianas, and shoots. Her left eye looked at Ivan in horror, and in place of her right eye grew a flower with a bright red shoot berry, reflecting the light of the flashlight. Ivan's mind clouded. He did not believe what was happening. He rushed to Nastya, but his right leg was already completely entangled with lianas. They had grown through the skin, penetrated the muscles, and completely wrapped around the bones of his shins and were rising higher. Only at this moment did reason and the ability to feel pain return to Ivan, and he howled. He howled not so much from pain as from despair and hopelessness. He tried to free his leg with his hands, but he had already lost the other one. The lianas rose higher, crawling into the folds of his suit, piercing the skin and wrapping around the bones. Ivan called for help, jerked his head in the hope of escape, but soon could not even do that, completely captured by predatory plants that began to devour him from the inside. He was fully conscious, but could no longer do anything, and the sight of his broken beloved brought even more pain to the remnants of his mind, until finally sharp lianas penetrated his brain. At dawn, the entire village came out to the unkempt house, greeting the morning sun. Surrounding it, the residents began chanting and slow dancing, standing in place and swaying from side to side like flowers guided by the wind. The vagrant looked at them sorrowfully, and a green tear flowed down his cheek. And when the residents of Warm Ground finished their morning ritual, they went home, smiling and patting each other on the back. They all looked younger than when they came to greet the new day in one of the most prestigious districts of Ransk.